Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Destiny Movie Night Hangout. I'm your host, Mike, and today my guests are both not here. Uh, one of my guests just bailed out last minute, so rather than just totally redo it, I figured, well, I'm here, might as well talk about the movie, Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke. So, Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke. It's a bit of a subculture stoner movie. Definitely an emphasis in and around smoking marijuana. Two kind of hipster-like guys. Um, movie begins, and basically, you see the authoritarian type father telling the kid what he thinks he should do. I mean, he's kind of an old kid, you could say, young adult, and he's got different ideas and not really listening. And next thing you know, he's leaving. He's getting out of the parents' house, um, off on his own. And the movie just kind of goes from one thing to the next, very much like. I mean, one might ask themselves, what is the point of this whole movie? Like where's it going? You often don't know from one scene to the next where the movie's going to take you. I found it to be interesting just from that perspective alone, because from scene to scene, moment to moment, you are encountered with situations where you have to respond in different ways. And this movie, like for instance, Buddy takes off in one of his parents' cars. He only gets so far, the car breaks down. He's got to get a ride. He's hitchhiking, and nobody's stopping for him. So what's he do? I mean, he basically puts two two melons or something like in his shirt, so it looks like he's got huge breasts. And then immediately after he gets a ride, somebody stops. And yeah, that's playing kind of on a point of our culture of just sex sells. Sex is a big point. Anywho, that's Chong, and Chong connects with Cheech, and the two of them are kind of going off together. And without rephrasing the whole movie here, we have a series of events of Cheech and Chong, and it's a bit of their adventure. And there's a lot of wacky scenarios, situations, and yada yada yada. It goes throughout. I mean, a lot of funny moments throughout these happenings. And what we find, to be somewhat of a major point throughout the movie is the deep cover police investigations, Sergeant Stadanko and his merry men, if you will, where they're always kind of on the case to make the big bust, as that's going to be a payday for them, ironically. And so they're always sneaking around and whatnot and trying to figure out where they can find the big score of drugs. Ironically, so much so that's just like the Cheech and Chong's characters, because so much so that's what they're trying to do is score the dope. So funny, because these different characters are portrayed so much so in opposition for each other, but ultimately, they're all looking for the same thing, which is kind of humorous, because neither party is so much aware of the other party. I mean, like, they know the other party exists, but they don't really know each other throughout the movie, and they cross paths a few times. And yeah, that happens to be, well, rather comical as it goes about. What what I find to be like quite interesting in and throughout the movie is just how different situations come about. Without really getting into like the politics, if you will, of, well, seeking out drugs or seeking out something else or whatnot, is just, they find themselves in a lot of, peculiar situations from time and time again. And, they do exhibit a number of creative ways in which to get themselves out of the situations, which is quite comical at times as well. Now, in watching this movie, though, a point that comes up for me specifically is the whole like war on drugs and the sides involved within it. This movie kind of showcases a little bit the strategic planning involved with drug watching or like seizing drugs, which is quite ridiculous in a lot of ways because I mean, why do people consume drugs in the first place? If we really look at it, people consume drugs because they want to feel good, which is showcasing, a quite concerning point if we really think about it for a moment, that people are not feeling all that good. So they take drugs, they want to feel better, kind of really like a point of medicine. I mean, what does happen, what is happening so much so with the use of drugs, and if we just, as a general point, um, drugs are abused in a lot of cases where, it goes beyond being a medicinal point and it's like deemed a point of recreation, like recreation indulgence that, one doesn't really believe they're using it for any sort of medicinal purpose, but it's just for recreation. But, ironically enough, if we really go into, what is recreational drug use and look at that, we're going to see some interesting points here. So yeah, let's go into that here for a moment. Okay, what is recreational drug use? Well, a common association would be, partying. Let's let's connect, drug use to partying. So, what is partying really? Hanging out with other people, talking, maybe, joking around, dancing, maybe listening to music. Uh, when you really think about it, like pretty basic stuff. Maybe, yelling, screaming, being silly. Uh, it really it centers around in communication in a lot of different ways. And yeah, obviously the drugs and the drinking are so much so connected to it. But if we look at it, the drinking and the drugs, are very much in a line the same kind of way. They're a point, a bridge of support really for people to feel more comfortable to express themselves. And if we have a look at that, what's really wrong about that? Um, I mean, I think it's awesome for everyone to express themselves here. Now, I think this can be a bit of a tricky subject, if you will, because it's not so much about the drugs or the alcohol being, right or wrong. I think it's a matter of investigating the starting point with it. That, if you're always using this medicine, if we will, and not really questioning, why you have to use this medicine, or are you able to, get better from, using this medicine, or is it just kind of like an ongoing coping mechanism, which, I think opens up a lot of questions into our self-accepted and allowed behavior. I forgot to mention in the beginning of this hangout, we have a Q&A point here. So I'm going to just open the Q&A here. Yeah, so I wasn't quite prepared to monologue this whole thing here, but here we're going through it. So yeah, I'd really appreciate if we have any questions come in. That would be fun and awesome. Now, reflecting, marijuana. Let's say back to myself. When I was younger, yes, I used to use marijuana, and interestingly enough, I had defined marijuana as my medicine, like my personal medicine, the medicine that, yeah, helps me relax, helps me realize things. It just made everything better, which, was quite interesting to me because it was really showcasing that the way I was living wasn't that great all around, like all the time. And so smoking pot just made things better. And yeah, that became like a real point of, you know, wow, okay, here we have something here that can help me enjoy myself in so many different ways. Um, Obviously, then it became like, well, a bit of a mind fuck after a while because it was like I created this relationship with weed where it became, my own personal savior, where I believe like, oh yes, like weed is the solution for myself, is the solution for everyone. It's all about that. And, obviously that gets into the point of abuse, and it is really an abdication of oneself's potential here in so many ways because, well, like anything, I mean, if you abuse it, too much is too much, and you're not really getting the benefits out of it. Now, yeah, so, for myself, anybody, let's say, who's like using pot, I would just, ask you this, like, what what does it do for you? Like, why do you do it as little or as much as you do? Do you see it as something that'll always be there for you? Because ultimately, I think it comes down to, questioning that point of if you need something else to substantiate yourself, like as a reoccurring point. Um, yes. So we are going to move on here. And yeah, maybe I'm a bit careless today in putting this hangout forth because, well, I was not prepared to talk to myself for this whole hangout. Um, yeah, but okay, like I decided to go on with the show. Now, you know, pot is an interesting drug in and of itself when we look at how it's classified in this world. I mean, it's the only drug that's classified as all categories. It's a stimulant, a depressant, and a hallucinogenic, which is interesting because drugs generally fall into, one of the categories, not all three. Um, yeah, which is quite fascinating in and of itself. So it's kind of like, and from my perspective, when I used it, it was whatever I needed it to be. If it was like I needed to pick me up, or I needed a slow me down, or somewhere in between there, that filled that void for me. But ultimately, what I found in questioning my relationships within smoking dope was that what am I getting away from? Like what stress is there? So, in using it, it became like, okay, let's use this like as a bridge of support. what points are coming up, what am I getting, a relief from. um, so it became like a point of working on myself while I was using it. But then, also in not using it, it's kind of like, I didn't have this, well, what I like regarded as a sort of, safety blanket in terms of moving myself, doing things, because, dope had become for myself like such a point of, well, like that stimulant point, that it was a real stimulus in a lot of things. I mean, at the same time, it acted, the opposite, like a catalyst, where it'd be like, to like allow myself not to move. But ultimately, what I saw within these points is that, whether I used it or I didn't use it, it came down to me. And then, in looking at this and just seeing, questioning my relationship with myself in a lot of different ways, it kind of became like, well, why do I need dope? And ultimately that became like, well, I don't really need it. And yeah, I would say it was really because of learning, basic tools presented through Destiny, that I really, considered changing myself, changing my life, in not committing to a life of smoking weed. Because definitely earlier on in my life, I saw that as a viable solution, or I would say more, not even necessarily a solution, but a coping mechanism or method for existing here in this world. As from my perspective, it just kind of made everything better. But ultimately, it didn't really address all the shit that was within me, buried in different ways. Yeah. And when we really consider like how it is we in fact get the high, it's always relative to the low. Like that low's got to exist within yourself too. So, that's something that I don't think is so commonly considered when, whether it's, drinking or drugs of any kind, or, just in everyday life, is that the relationship between our highs and our lows, like how we build it up, and, it comes down, like what goes up must come down, as above, so below, kind of thing. And what I found for myself is that, especially in coming off the pot, was that I didn't have this, crutch anymore. And things were really challenging for me in a lot of my relationships, because I would have a lot of emotions that would come out at different times, in various forms of reaction, where something would irk me in one way or another. And having been so accustomed to in the past, just, having that, dope as like the self-medicated point, that like, oh, it's all good, man. It's all good, like all the time. I didn't really have to, assess my shit, or like the shit that what was there in so many ways wasn't really like always coming up, because I was in that high. And so the shit was like, temporarily not there, or buried down, contributing to the blast off scenario that I was in. Though interesting point as well is that, in not experiencing those reactions and stuff in different moments the same as I would normally, uh it showed me how, ridiculous they were in like those moments. So, you could say some, pros, cons to it. I mean, it's, it's an interesting point all around. um back back to the movie, an interesting point I felt like it showed in the movie was, the different mindsets about, drugs or not doing drugs, where like somebody who does drugs, like the hippie type movement and whatnot, it's regarded as a more open-minded, like expand your mind through using drugs. Whereas, somebody who's not open to drugs would often be regarded as more, conservative and closed-minded, square, straight edge, just kind of tight, not chilled out at all. And that's kind of like an interesting dichotomy in and of itself, because it's kind of like, the flip-flop on the polarity play there, where a lot of drug use, can really fuck yourself within your mind, where it's like, yeah, you opened your mind up, and so opened up that, well, it's like creating, your own rabbit hole that you went down, and you just stained yourself with like thinking so much shit and not really having like a practical play out for all the stuff that you participated within your mind. So, in a way created like more codes as a word enslavement, so much so because, our words are so much so the basis, the backing, like the law of our being here. And if we're participating in words in so many different ways without really, considering ourselves within and as those like words that we're thinking, participating in, like acting out, there's consequences for that. So, definitely excessive like drug use could definitely, encourage a sort of like split mind personality, if you will. It's not to say that drugs necessarily will cause mental illness, but there's definitely, a lot of examples of people who've abused drugs extensively and have kind of fucked themselves up. I mean, you could say, there's a number of examples of people who didn't use drugs and fucked themselves up too. So it's not to say one way is the right way or the other way, but I would say, it's always important with whatever you're doing is to have, a certain amount of discernment and to be open to the possibilities of different, scenarios, and to consider adapting or changing your course of action or ways of thinking. Now, the to start with, like, let's say the other side of that, of somebody who doesn't even want to experiment with drugs, test drugs out. There's a lot of interesting points in and about that. If we look at, common popular education about drugs, uh, well, like let's say through your upbringing with the school system and through the government, there's, a lot of, well, scare tactics employed, where, it's like, if you use drugs, you're going to be fucked. Don't do drugs. Don't be dumb. So, I mean, that kind of education about it is pretty bad when you really consider it, because I mean, kids in general, oftentimes want to do what they're told not to do. They're not given like real good explanation. It's just like, wow, that's that. And especially if they think there's like some holes in the story, the explanation. I mean, that kind of explains my story in a lot of ways, in a lot of different things, where, you would like some quality explanations. And what I'm getting at here with the point of drugs from the perspective of just like the scare tactics, don't do it, it's bad for you, is it's really perpetuating this dissonance and this sort of, war, if you will, between like the people that do it, the people who don't, and the people kind of like in the middle, as like, yeah, or just kind of accepting that some people don't do it, some people do it. But what you have is with these sides is the war about it, and it's quite fascinating, really, because often what happens is you get, well, this conflict or this play out where the people on the one side like judge the people on the other side for not participating like they are, or not accepting that they think this is the way, they think this is the way. And go figure that our reality here, we have this extensive war on drugs through the various alphabet agencies, as like, ooh, the FBI, the CIA, or whatever body of policing in your area, where it's so much so this like big thing to enforce the use of these substances, which in a lot of ways is pretty funny when you think about it, because it's like this like little plant like thing, like this like little rock, or this flower, or whatever, or this like liquid. And it's like, whoa, 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 we have to control the flow of this, we can't have people doing this. And then obviously there always is, and it just perpetuates this dissonance. And I think if we really examine why that even exists, it's so much so just the nature of our individual accepted and allowed war within our words, where we become like decided in different ways about things, as like polarized, where it's like this way, that way, and there's a friction between this way and that way of how you go about doing it, which I mean really is silly. And in walking the Desteni I process, I mean that's something that I'm working with still very much, is sorting out the conflicts within myself, basically like seeing how it's not about uh, polarizing opinions about things, essentially, where you're making up a perception that like, oh, that's good or that's bad, and then taking this stance, because it's so funny, because the way in which we're educated, so much so it's in like this yes, no, good, bad relationship play, perpetuating this song and dance of this side versus this side, when we look at like a circle, like the ball, it's like, well, it's one ball, this side is that side, you move it around, like it's the whole thing. So to compress one way versus the other way, kind of missing the point of it all. But what's fascinating about it is that in with our words, making like such a strong feeling, like as a positive energy about something, we create the opposite in another point. So it's like this magnet, where it's like, the two forces like collide, and they always collide because that's the poles of like the opposite poles, like boom, boom. And if we go into more just the using of drugs, it's good in a lot of ways. And to be very, very simple about it, you say, oh, it's bad in a lot of ways. But to move beyond the good and the bad, just to practically look and be like, yeah, there can be some support here, and there can also be some abuse here. It really comes down to the individual's starting point within what they're doing, what they're participating, and taking accountability for it. I think really that's well, I see that as like the real key to our world here is in how, you know, we take accountability for ourselves. And I see this self accountability starting with our thoughts, words, and deeds. And I see them all being, connected so much so as our ability to relate and, you know, express ourselves with our words in our various participations here. And man, this has been like a real challenging process for myself because, you know, basically growing up, you think about like what's common in growing up is that, you adapt or you adopt, excuse me, certain, beliefs, opinions, perceptions of this is the way things are. This is how things go. And this is how I feel about these things. This is what I like and this is what I don't like. And there's where the hate is. Here's where the love is. Uh, and as we age, more and more, typically, what happens is, we create, our vision as like a sort of tunnel vision where it's kind of like, born like wide open. There's, it's kind of like all the information is here, but yet as we age, it's like forming like the picture of how we see the big picture, if you will. And it's like we've colored it in all these different ways, and these colors are not necessarily like a true reflection of the picture here, but kind of like, the countries on the map of like how we got this world mapped out as being like, oh, this is a this is a this means a this in relation to this. And it's like a huge mess as a war of the world, so much so. Which I mean is a big topic in and of itself. Now, using the tool of self-forgiveness, I mean that has really assisted me to investigate, explore, these different worlds of words, if you will, from like, the positive, energetic, high like experiences and, the opposites there. And then kind of like everything in between. And doing this, seeing how, like my body is, the vessel, the machine in so many ways in which like I'm producing these chemical experiences based on my relationship with words here. And for myself, what I could see was just how automated my behavior playouts were, like very predictable programming, though ironically enough it's so much so unconscious where you don't totally know how in it because you're so in it that it's like, yeah, you can see what you're participating in, but you're so immersed in it that it's challenging to see beyond that scope. Kind of like we're always to an extent in our own box. And what I found self-forgiveness to be was basically that while questioning of our box that we're in as like, you know, I don't have to stay bound to this point that let's say I just reacted to in a moment. Like I can forgive and let it go, that I don't have to be bound to this like particular information till the end of times because like I reacted to it in this one moment, that I can move beyond that. And this was like huge for me because initially in seeing, well, and before I could even see this point in being like informed, if you will, that self-forgiveness can be used as like an amazing self-empowerment tool. I was kind of like, yeah, like, okay, like it's just, you just say the words like, yeah, you just got to say it like it's a spell or some sort of, self-hypnosis. But ironically, it's the complete opposite. It's really the accountability factor in recognizing your own self-hypnosis, because we've authorized, our programming as like how conditioned we are into seeing things and feeling things in particular ways, as it's just like mathematics, that we just voted for it this way, 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 as the outflow of all our participation since, we started existing here. And I mean, that's kind of like, holy shit, really? Like, whoa, like I, didn't really know what I was doing here. So, in taking regard for what I'm doing here, it's been a process play with words, like me as the words here. And yeah, fascinating, 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 fascinating. It's it's like a treasure hunt that we're on all the time if we're willing to, investigate the treasure that's here, that's ours, really. I mean, treasure, which is, like life, that which is treasured, that which is awesome. And, we're all part of it. We're all privy to it. It's like everything is hidden in plain sight in so many ways, where, we don't realize the extent of our potential, our abilities, because, well, we're not really, questioning it necessarily. And that's kind of the interesting thing, if we just allow ourselves to go on without really questioning our acceptances and allowances, and really, investigating those outward. Yeah. So, um, going back to the movie here, how does the movie end? Well, if we look at how the movie ends, it's like, the big rock show, Battle of the Bands. And, that's pretty funny because Chong is like totally out near the end. And, ironically enough, some dope makes its way through the vents, and that kind of like rejuvenates him there for a moment, and he's able to function because he was like on some other drugs, and he was just so out of it that he couldn't play, couldn't function. And the point there is that there's a lot of, fucked up things here in this world in so many different ways. To get rigid about the use of drugs for, this, that, or whatever is, not necessarily helpful to anyone here in a lot of ways. It's just kind of contributing to, a friction, because it can be like a bridge of support. You can say like, well, if they have to use a bridge, that's, they're fucked. They should just be fucked. I mean, that's not really considerate. Shouldn't we all like be able to enjoy ourselves here, like all the time? I mean, isn't that what this world, should be about all the time? Is like enjoying ourselves all the time. It's funny because often in having such, discussion about a question like that, shouldn't we be able to enjoy ourselves all the time? Uh, you know, there's there's like a defense that comes up, like, well, we can't enjoy ourselves all the time because, no one would take responsibility for anything. And, in a statement like that, it's seeing how responsibility is seen as, well, that's not enjoyable. Like doing work, caretaking for what is here is not responsible. Is like our fun or our enjoyment is, ironically enough, that which isn't responsible. And what is important that we have to like care for and do ultimately to like have a world that's great, um, is not enjoyable. So interesting how basically like the common accepted and allowed relationships here, you could say as a general point of how we're all participating here, is that shit sucks and it's got to continue to suck, because if it didn't suck, we wouldn't do things that didn't suck, and everything sucks. So continue on in this sort of like suckness kind of play. And I think that's, I see that it's changing here, where the internet is a great example of this, the openness of dialogue and communication, where these points can ripple outward, where who knows who's going to watch this. Maybe nobody's going to watch this. Who knows, you know but it's that point, just those avenues of communication and the potential like outward directions in which it can go. Yes, potential. And going back to the drug point, it's funny, I don't think I've ever talked this much myself about drug reflection per se. uh, Myself, I found, in many instances, like I've mentioned about, the partying and whatnot, is by, being under the influence of something, it made it easier for me to like be able to move myself and do something in a particular way, where like, there was a fear or some sort of aversion to it, self-judgment or anxiety, or any plethora of things of just kind of like not wanting to look, stupid, or not do, the most amazing job, or all sorts of like bullshit essentially. Whereas then, having like a drink or doing some drug or whatever, just kind of relaxing oneself to actually do the move there, do the move, not give a shit about what happens as a result of doing it. Basically, trusting oneself to move in that point, in that moment. And, ultimately, this is the process that we're all walking here. How I see it is that, the world is like fucked up in so many ways, and that's a reflection to me of all our individual fuck ups, like accumulated and like collectively, stored as this one point, which is like the total world existence. And so really it's like we're walking a process of like unfucking shit here in so many ways. And it starts with ourself, and walking these points that are challenging, like basically learning to like move and speak and do things that go beyond our resistance as the feeling or emotion we have towards it or away from it. Because as long as our movement is like a fucking polarized like magnet play, then the movement is just so much contained in this war, friction, da 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 da, is like this, boom, smash, boom, uh smashing each other up essentially, because it's always like boom, this goes there, oh, it comes back, it hits that, that goes that way, it hits that, instead of like everybody all here like jiving together, moving around in complementary actions, is like, ooh, this, that, da 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 da, instead of like smashing into each other and whatnot, and basically ultimately rubbing each other out, with the friction at play. And for myself, a major point within this process for me is just to voice myself, because it's like a challenge at times, where, you know, there's like an aversion, like being like, oh fuck, like, you know, what do I have to say really? Like, is my shit clear? You know, could somebody be saying it better than me? How's it coming out? You know, and then seeing myself speak about a point, present myself and being like, oh fuck, that was, you know, that was kind of lame. That wasn't my finest presentation of myself, which, you know, in so many ways is interesting because I mean, to fucking do excellent presentations all the time in anything and everything, you know, that's kind of like, wow, there's a whole fucking learning process involved in doing anything super effectively. And, you know, if we only pick like a point or a couple points that we do because we actually develop those points without really thinking about it, but that's all we really want to participate in because we're so good at that. I mean, that's kind of fucking lame. We're missing out on all these other things in ways in which we're able to move ourselves and express ourselves here. And yeah, that's kind of like, you know, huge really in so many ways is to open ourselves up and, you know, really create a world that's opened up in ways that are, you know, awesome in all ways around, you know, all ways, all ways, which is just like, yes, that's a cool way for us to exist here in this world. Now, the real challenge about that, obviously, is starting with ourselves, because I think the real kicker about it is that, yeah, you know, the challenge is in seeing yourself and doing things where, you know, you look pretty fucking lame, like not necessarily so attractive as a point, because the presentation of yourself in that is, you know, sloppy, rough around the edges, not, you know, not the perfect cut, you know, kind of raw. Um, yeah, and fuck. What I'm saying here is, you know, so much synonymous of this Hangout presentation here, where this is just off the cuff, and you know, I didn't script it in any way whatsoever. And there was like a point early on in the Hangout where, you know, I just wanted to be like, well, fuck this. Like the guest didn't show up. Um, what am I doing here? I don't have a specific plan as like my words versed at how it's gonna go the whole way through, and you know, nobody's tuning in that I can see. Nobody's like asking me any fucking questions. So maybe I should just shut this up, shut myself up here, and not do this because, you know, creating like the reasons to give myself an out of moving myself through this, you know. And yeah, I saw that and I was like, you know what, like fuck that, let's just do it, let's just go for it, let's play with it. And you know, within this playing with this here, this Hangout, I mean, I think, yes, I definitely faced, you know, some points of like, I'm in like responsibility mode because I'm, you know, the host for this Hangout, which is a Destiny Hangout, and kind of like, oh, okay, I have to, you know, talk all right. I have to, you know, thinking of like different rules or ways in which I should express myself here in this Hangout, what to do. I'm, you know, got to be on the ball, this, that, whatever. And, you know, created my own sort of mind fuck in ways of like, oh, fuck, like, you know, like just little points of, for myself here in, yeah, directing conversation flow. And it's funny, it's fascinating in so many ways because, you know, if we look at that point, that moment to really participate uh, as ourself, as like speaking up, voicing ourself in every moment, like as who we are. Whether that means physically, like speaking words, like through our mouth, our sounds, or just in fact moving ourselves in particular ways, as the really like living, you know, the who we are, like as our voice, like our sound, as our action, like being in action here. Um, we have points where in our mind it's the war, so to speak, as that shit that comes up as like our own you know militarized defense systems, and being like, ah, well, da 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 da, that not where we go into a feeling emotion. And I mean, it's fascinating, this whole process. And I think it's cool the more that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and express ourselves as like what's going on, what we see, and like dare ourselves really to live the care to move through these different moments, and play with what we say, and actually have fun, enjoy all of it, this whole it that is here, which is us. Tag, you're it, we're all it. And yes, I'm going to end the hangout here for today, because, well, the hangout has gone on for just about the whole hour here. And yeah, that's about the time for today. So next week, we will have another movie. I'm not sure what movie it will be. Voice your comments, opinions, dare to say something. And yeah, see you next week. Thanks. This has been your host, Mike, and tuning out. A word.